Firstly, let me welcome you all to the latest in our Rural Voices seminar series from the Rural Museums Network. This is our opportunity to bring together expert speakers and museum professionals to share how rural collections and sites can better include a wide range of voices in the stories that they tell. So if you have any ideas and thoughts for talks that you'd like us to present as part of the Rural Museums Network, do please get in touch because we'd love to hear more from you. So I probably should introduce myself. My name's Lisa. I'm the collections manager here at the Food Museum in Stowmarket, Suffolk. So today's session is entitled Rethinking the Rural Life Museum, Irons, Pots and Griddles, Oh My. And this is an opportunity for us to focus on themes of audit and rationalisation. Now, this might be something that you're tackling in your museum, or it might not. But this is a chance for us to have a good discussion about it and to think about how people are looking into this subject area, so that if you are thinking about it and aren't quite sure, then maybe we can answer some of your questions and help support you with that. But if it is something that you are already working on, then maybe you would be willing to share with us your thoughts and on the whole process of this and the fun that we may have with it. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of the sort of the theory behind it. So according to the Collections Trust, and I'm going to read this, rationalisation is a procedure whereby a museum improves its understanding of a collection so that the collection can be used more effectively for the benefit of its users. The need to rationalise a collection is driven by many different factors and may include uncontrolled collecting in the past, increasing pressures on storage space, or the need to meet organisational priorities. Controlled rationalisation enables museums to develop a systematic and strategic approach to effective management and increased use of their collections, allowing them to maximise resources, refocus collections activity, and increase public access. Now, one part of rationalisation means that it can lead to the disposal of objects, although rationalisation in its broadest sense nowadays is also about providing ways to consider new and different uses for our collections. Okay, so that's the theory. Many of us and the curatorial staff that have gone before have deliberated long and hard over objects to collect for our museums. So quite often review and rationalisation can be both challenging and worrying because we can feel the weight of what's gone before on our shoulders, but we also know that we want to make the right decisions for the public that come after us. There's no one size fits all. So each museum who has their own unique collection must work out the route that works best for them. So today we've got two case studies for you, and there will be the opportunity for discussion and questions later. Please do feel free to drop your questions in the chat because if you're like me, you won't remember them later on. So do shove them in there and we'll review them as we go later on. But one of our museums for this purposes of this talk is at the start of their journey, focusing on quite small objects, whilst the other is much further through, but with a focus on larger objects. So let me introduce the first of our speakers this afternoon. So Fiona Byrne is our Curator of History at the Ulster Folk Museum. They have over 60,000 objects in their folk life collections. Fiona looks after the Irish domestic folk collections at the Ulster Folk Museum, which includes the vernacular furniture, dresser and hearthware. The folk life collection also has objects relating to traditional folk crafts, music, culture, tools and agriculture. Fiona, are you there?
I am here. Thank you very much. Let me,
Over to you, my lovely.
right, this is going to work this time, isn't it? I'm going to share and it's going to come
Let's
on
give
the
it a go.
screen. One wee second. Right. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much for that introduction. I do look after a wide range of items, and I'm very much starting with looking to rationalize the collection and dealing with disposals. So, just a bit about my background. I got moved to the Ulster Folk Museum from the Ulster Museum. My background was more political, military sort of history. The situation at the folk museum was that there was a retirement package basically, and a lot of staff, left, and it was a situation where I got moved here and I didn't get to learn from the former curators. Basically, there was a bit of a vacuum here, and I was a bit of a steep learning curve, shall we say. I'm still learning. This was about 2018-ish. So very much fight my feet with a very broad collection, very massive store. Yes, I was dealing with more niche things, as I said, sort of more political and military. This is, as I said, yes, a learning curve, trying to get to know a new large collection. So, trying to look at the many objects we have, looking at disposal. One wee second, and try to just click. So, I've always been terrified, absolutely terrified of the thought of rationalising and disposing of items. Um, a curator who is no longer with us at the Folk Museum said, "How arrogant of you to even consider, disposing of an item that former curators deemed worthy of being in the collection." And I was like, "Oh my God, you're right. Oh my God, I'm not arrogant. Why would I even think of disposing some of these things?" So it's it's it is hard for me. I always try to find a reason to keep something, and I felt it's this weight, and oh, I don't know this collection that well yet. What if I make a mistake here, an error? I really was quite afraid of getting rid of something and then figuring out it was something significant, due to my lack of knowledge and expertise, that I was making an error here. um, I know we need to rationalize. We have a large store, but it is packed. When it is really packed, and I know the collecting priorities have changed over time than when we were first set up. We have 58 buildings in our open air museum. They all needed furnished, and at times we've lost our way a bit, that we don't just collect for the folk open air museum. We collect social history items as well. So I think sometimes we went a bit crazy collecting for that period of just the folk museum, but really we're broader than that. And I do need space to collect more contemporary material relating to the social history and objects of Ulster. So yes, big daunting task here. Um, Trying to learn from mistakes that I've already committed very early on in my days. Um, I was presented with this large pair of forged bellows, and I was like, yeah, yeah, sure, yeah, only in this role. Yeah, we've got two forges, surely spur bellows. Yes, they'll be of use. No, they weren't. So the condition was terrible. And I thought, oh, well, maybe they could take off the leather and use it as a template or something. I just figured, surely we'll have use for this in some sort of shape or form. Um, my first mistake was one, taking it in, and then two, I went and accessioned them. So we hadn't quite, it was a new thing for me dealing with support collection, because honestly, we hadn't dealt with that when I worked at the Ulster Museum. Everything was accessioned. We didn't have some things that weren't documented, of course, but I always just accessioned items if they were worthy of being accessioned in my eye. I just a whole new ball game, going from a traditional museum of things behind glass to this open air museum where we need a large support collection. So I accessioned them, and I realized they weren't going to be of use to anyone. The conservators were very concerned at the condition. I thought, right, okay, well, maybe I'll look at this disposal then. I've made a mistake here. Um, then the question was, why did you accession these? And I was like, look, I thought they'd be of use. Hands up, made an error here. So our disposal policies at the time were very, very new. Disposal was only really considered if something, was maybe disintegrating or poor condition. I thought, well, this is a candidate like that. But because they were accessioned, our board was very nervous of this. And this started the whole process of, we really need to not just change my own way of thinking, but also, the board needed educated in this as well. Um, Another example are this random box of non-safety matches that turned up. They weren't documented, no sign of them in day books, anything like that. And it's like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. So, of course, we've got better hazards policies and procedures in now. But in 2018, we didn't. And oh, who deals with this? I don't know. So it was recommended to me to contact the Fire Safety Office of Northern Ireland. I did. He's like, I want you to stop what you're doing and immediately go and run them under a tap of cold water for your safety, because if they even brush up against one another, they could spark. And I was absolute panic stations there. Of course, internally, I was like, this doesn't feel right. I'm destroying an object, putting them underwater. So, yes, that was a bit scary too. And a conservator wouldn't do it. I was like, I don't want to do this. And basically, in the office by my kettle, there I was at the tap, putting these under cold water. And I was like, this isn't right. I can't believe I'm doing this. And I put them in the bin. And I was like, no, I could have saved the boxes, but I was told to do this immediately. So it's all confusion and fear with me about disposals. It really, really was. I thought, no, there has to be better ways of this. We do have better ways, I have to say now. We really, really do. Our head of collections has worked really hard to get procedures and processes and workflows in place that it is easier for us now to deal with disposals from rationalisation or pure conditioned items. So non-accessioned items, which I would have a lot of in my collection, a lot of small support collections. I mean, plates break regularly on the pine dressers, teacups, people touch them and drop them or hold them by the handles, things like that. It is much easier for me to put that up for disposal now. It just goes to our director of collections, can give the final go ahead. And accessioned low risk items or small items, like I've just mentioned, our CEO can also give the go ahead of that. The board will deal and will, assess and review medium risk and high risk accessioned items. But this has been a real journey for all of us, I think, internally and our board to change our way of thinking on this. So with all these lovely procedures in place, our whole disposal forms have been revamped. We have forms for non-accessioned specimens, and it is just those 2 pages. They've made it very simple for us to propose something for disposal, the reason, things like that, and it has to be signed off by the 3 people that I mentioned already. And then forms for the accessioned items, obviously things need to be deaccessioned, and we talk about the disposal category. So yes, it's a longer form, as it should be for something that is accessioned. So moving on to think, right, I know how to dispose of things now. I know how to do that. I know I can advertise objects, hopefully find it a new home. But I felt there was a lot of advice and support out there from, MA, Collections Trust, internally, people had different opinions, but I think we were all getting onto the same page. I actually just found it really overwhelming, if I'm being honest. I just felt there was nearly too much advice out there, and I have to do grids, I have to score objects. There's all different advice. And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't really know what to do. So I decided just to start really, really small. And bear in mind, this is all just within the last 12 months or so. I just started with broken items. So I've mentioned that, we are an open air museum. Our conservators are flat out. They are very much tied up with working working on objects for exhibitions and things, that sometimes our damages get put aside. And I've realized, because our conservators are one team that work for the Ulster Museum, the Ulster Folk Museum, the Ulster Transport Museum, and the Ulster American Folk Park. So one small team to deal with those 4 quite large national museums is not a lot of conservators. So yes, they're always busy. So I realized, as I said, I'm dealing with a lot of legacy issues that I've inherited, and there's nobody else here. It's me, just on my own, trying to figure it all out. And there's a whole front room full of all these broken items that I think were in the queue, perhaps to be assessed if they could be, conserved, or in this case, it is very much generic support material that I've got a lot of. So it wouldn't be a good use of conservator time, considering, there's a lot of work for them to do and such a small team. So I just started and went through sort of broken items. They were not accessioned, and there was no point in advertising items like this. Nobody would want them due to the conditions. So I felt safe proposing these and actually disposing from our collection because, well, you can see them. Look at them. They are broken. So this got me thinking about rationalizing. I said, I have a huge store. So hence the title, pots, griddles, and irons. Oh my! I've got a lot of things, but as I said, the fear and being overwhelmed, I just wanted to start small. So I realized we actually have 150 griddles in the Folk Museum, and you know, do we need 150 griddles really? So we have 58 buildings in our open air museum. 21 of those are domestic dwellings, which, the potential to have a hearth and a griddle. Even if a house had two griddles each, say 50 would more than cover being out in the open air museum. Um, say, I don't know, few interesting ones to have in the store to be kept as good accessioned examples. I still have the potential to rationalize half of that collection. Um, I have, as I said, a lot of legacy backlog to deal with. When I find a griddle like what you see in the picture there, yes, the condition's rusted, but it could be brought back. I've seen worse than that being brought back to life, all right. But because I don't know what its number was, and because the griddles are used sometimes as baking demonstrations at the hearth, if you put a number on it, it gets burnt off. I've discovered this. The number gets burnt off. So you have to be very careful with I think sometimes things were treated more like prop as opposed to support collection. Oh, we've got loads of griddles, so we can just put them out. They could be used as demonstrations. So if I can't find a number for something, and how could I tell which griddle this is of the 150 I have numbers of? So then we have to do the awful think of the folk temp numbers, as we call them, temporary number for something. It could potentially have an accession number or a daybook number, but I don't know for sure. I mean, they're all roughly similar sizes within maybe 6 inches or so. So I have to give it a temporary number. So I may be able to reconcile that in time. I may not. The other wee entry I just wanted to highlight there is from our daybook, and it's an interesting griddle there. It's actually got initials. It's got HF inscribed on it of Hugh Fitchie, who was the donor's grandfather who actually made the griddle. That's something I want to keep nice and safe in my store accessioned. So I am just going through the griddles, trying to just find out whatever information I have, anything with any particular interest in provenance I do want to keep. Anything like that folk temp one, well, I'm happy for it to go out and be used, but I still have a lot of work ahead of me, even to rationalize this one small collection. Let me move on here. So similar story with the irons, funny enough. We do have over 100 irons, and most of them, like when I go through the records, it is very descriptive, but very little provenance or any extra contextual info about this. Even if it said used by grandmother, I'd be delighted. It was used by that donor's grandmother. That's a piece of information about it. But no, a lot of them are just irons and not great condition. Going by the griddles again, if we just make sure every house had at least 2 irons and some spare, I still have more irons than I need. I don't think I could justify bringing in any more irons unless there's a fantastic story or it was owned by somebody amazing. I really don't think I could take in any more irons. And the things with irons as well, I've also lent a lot out for our learning team, have 10 of them. Yes, and these take up, I know they're quite small items, but it's quite a number of shelves that they take up in the store. So I just think I have to go through this. I have to rationalize. We do not need this many irons. The pots is probably the biggest thing I'm going to talk about. So 150 pots, can you see all the shelving space they take up? I mean, I love them. They are, it was a main feature of the Irish hearth here. You'd had your cooking pots, but they are large. They are quite large. We do have some small ones, but mostly they are large examples. And again, not a lot of contextual provenance information about them. I think they were just donated to the Folk Museum. Oh, you could use those out in your cottages, as people call them. Yes, we could use those out in the BR Museum. Thank you very much. But we hope in time that we will get exhibition space. We currently don't. We used to, but we don't anymore. I do aspire someday to have exhibition space. So I do hope to have interesting examples to display and not just for the open air museum. But again, do I need 154 when they take up so much space in the store? The photograph of the one there at the bottom, you can see it has a bit of a shamrock stamp on it, so that's a little bit more interesting, a bit of a maker's mark there, or, but otherwise it's hard to distinguish them. And the condition of some of them, you can see in the shelves, some are missing parts, corroded right through. Again, with our conservator space being so, or free time being very limited, I have to be realistic here about what I could keep. If it's not good enough for display, like that pot there, is that shiny, beautiful looking one, is on display in the Ulster Museum. So it got, the VIP treatment, it got conserved. The rest of them, when I was looking for another pot to put in our Bad Bridget exhibition, which is in the American folk store, actually struggled to find like a really good one that wouldn't take the conservator an age, to conserve. So it's like, oh my God, I have all these pots and they're not really worthy of, they're not display worthy. They're would take a lot of work. So yes, I've had these thoughts for the past few years. We really do need to start rationalizing this. Now, dealing with disposal. So going forward, right, we've got new forms. We have this very fancy workflow now that somebody higher up has put together. It is very good for me, as I said, with the bellows, although they got approved at disposal, they're still here. I ended up putting them back in my store because I didn't know how to dump them. I advertised them for 6 months. Of course, nobody wanted them. I was like, well, what do I do now? I can't lift them into a skip. What do I do? And then nobody else knew the answer to that. And so they're still here. So I haven't actually followed through on those yet. But now, only very recently, we do have this workflow, and it will be the collections operations manager that will deal with all this. So it makes me feel a little bit better. I'm not the one doing the actual disposing, because it just still doesn't sit right in my curatorial brain of disposing of something. We recently this year we relook at our collections development policy every 5 years, and you can see there are my priorities for collecting. So it is nice. It's awful saying no to people, a polite decline as I call it, when we're offered donations, but I'm trying to be very strict until we can rationalize and see it has to be amazing and it has to fit in with those collecting policies. And now we all complete a specimen acquisition form where I have to justify it must fit in with our collecting policy, and it needs to be signed off by my boss, the head of collections, the director of collections, the head of collection services, which is about storage and space, the head of conservation, which is about condition, and the CEO. So it takes an absolute age to get all these signatures, but at least everybody's on board. I feel the onus is not just on myself and the pressure that if I'm bringing in something large, will this be regretted down the line? At least all these other people will have approved it as well. So I kind of feel we're all a big team in this now with acquiring, just like it takes a whole team of people to approve disposal. So we're all in this together. It's not down to just one person, it is a whole team. And, we're all in it together. And that's it. So it was just very brief there. I'm very much starting off on this. I've started off with broken, damaged items. There is a lot of advice out there, but I just find myself going, oh my God, I just want to start. I did start. I feel great that I've started. My mindset has changed of it. It is a healthy thing. I have to make room for potentially other key items that can come into my store, especially that we don't just collect for the period of the Folk Museum, which is about 1900 in Ulster. I have to collect contemporary social history as well. So yes, I'm just one person here, doing it on my own, no funding. It's going to take forever, but I've started and I feel good about that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That's wonderful. And we love the fact that you're just making a start. It doesn't matter that you're on your own, because I think you're doing a great job. We've been similar situation here, and obviously rural museums is often a case where you are working on this stuff on your own. So yeah, excellent start. Really excited to hear. I might have my eye on a few of your pots until some of my staff might say no. But yeah, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to keep this moving. Our second study this afternoon comes from our own museum here in Stowmarket. So I'm pleased to be joined by our Food Museum curator, Catherine Bridges. Catherine curates our Changing Exhibition programme, supports the community exhibition space, and helps to lead our collections development and research projects. Between us, we work with a collection of over 40,000 objects. These range from homewares to working steam traction engines, as well as, like you, historic buildings across an 84-acre site. So without further ado, we're going to share our slides. Thank you for those of you that are popping questions in the chat. That's fantastic. We will have a look at those in a little while. Okay, so hopefully my voice will last out. But for those of you that maybe haven't come across the Food Museum before, we started off as the Abbots Hall Museum of Rural Life in East Anglia in the 1950s. Over time, we've changed our name several times to the Museum of East Anglian Life and most lately the Food Museum, as we work to ensure that the museum remains relevant to visitors in the 2020s and that our name represents what the museum does and says today. Starting out as a small volunteer-run organisation, we have grown to become an accredited museum and NPO with over 40,000 objects. The legacy from those early days was a series of card indices. Oh, that was the previous picture. There we go. Series of card indices with a range of numbering systems and dramatically differing amounts of information. Some of the worst being as short as plough and no more information than that. Today, our site occupies 84 acres of land in the very heart of the town of Stowmarket and includes 28 buildings, 18 of which are historic structures. One of the biggest buildings is our collection store. This was built in the early 1990s to house a rapidly expanding collection. It's a metal-clad structure and it suffered from the weather. It also had a lack of funds to maintain it. And since at least the early 2000s, it has had water dripping through the roof. By the early 2020s, that had become a waterfall. And here you see one of our staff members with a volunteer merrily trying to capture that waterfall and send it into a big dustbin that we were emptying every 20 minutes. So it was pretty full on. In 2017, we began a project to improve our collection standards, putting collections back at the centre of the museum's work. While the collection has always been at the heart of the museum, the focus for many years had been on fundraising and survival. Support from the Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund, the Headley Trust and Share Museums East Development Programme, as it was back then, enabled us to prioritise the digitisation of our card catalogue and to photograph every object in the collection, or at least start to, so that we could make them accessible online and to users across the world. This approach is now embedded in the museum's ongoing collections management. For the digitisation element, known as Search for the Stars, we worked with volunteers to carry out on-site volunteering, remote from home volunteering, group volunteering through one-off sessions with students and groups, and here you can see students from the University of Sheffield, as well as out-of-hours sessions using the Meetup app. So we would encourage people to join us on site to undertake digitisation work. Excuse me.
Sure. So this process worked really well. We added records to the system, and as we said, anyone could do it remotely from anywhere in the world because we were using the eHive system, and that really played to our advantage. And we also used all of these volunteers to kind of create our star object system. So we really tried to democratise the process and allow our volunteers to kind of recognise what they thought was significant about our collection rather than deciding that ourselves. For us, COVID had a plus point in that regard, because people had time on their hands and were able to give it to us to help us get this online, and that massively accelerated the process for us. So, as I just said, we use eHives as a cloud-based system, which means it can be used by anyone with a computer and an internet connection, which obviously isn't the case with all collections information systems. So that really guided our choice to use that particular one. We recruited volunteers through role descriptions, hoping to obviously give them skills that would kind of develop themselves, as well as obviously giving something to us. The role could be flexible around commitments such as childcare, work, etc., which again is obviously something that traditional volunteer roles really struggle with. And actually, as a result, really interestingly, it attracted a much younger demographic than we had previously experienced. We promoted their role in various ways through job sites such as the University of Leicester Jobs Desk, and did obviously attract people who were looking to gain museum experience, but perhaps might typically find it difficult to go on site and complete volunteering. We also use social media, university sites, websites, apps, etc. And each volunteer had a phone interview to find out more about them and why they might want to get involved. We then took up references, required them to sign a simple volunteer agreement alongside other policies such as data protection, and we then talked them through the work either in person or online, and that we check their work at kind of random intervals just to ensure consistency. And then we sent batches of scan cards via a Dropbox link, so they didn't need to be downloaded, and all of those simple things really make it much easier. And then we required volunteers to update a Google spreadsheet monthly so we could kind of keep a track as to how those batches were going. And it also enabled us to report to funders. We keep in touch with those volunteers via a monthly newsletter, which helps them to feel kind of in the loop with general museum work, any problems or changes. That initial digitisation work took 6 years and is still ongoing, and we're working now through the last 100 batches of record cards, and each batch gets checked by a different second person just to ensure that any errors are ruled out. We've also added 7,500 library records since COVID and are now working through our paper-based archive. So we then moved on to the photography element of the project, which is known as Shooting Stars. You can tell we have a theme here. And we were able to fund some trainee positions and obviously work with the volunteer teams to start photographing objects from our small store. Photographs are obviously really helpful when you're rationalising a collection because it gives you a starting point. We had so many documents without photos, without information, and that obviously made the process much harder. So one of the goals when we're rationalising the collection is to add photographs to all of the records. Even if we decide not to retain an object, it's still really important to have obviously a photographic record of that. So it was a really helpful process to get going with. For those of you that don't know the Food Museum, our small store is filled with roller racking, hence why we set up the Star Shed enterprise that you can see on the left as a photography studio, and a space, importantly, that we could just heat for the volunteers to make the role more attractive to them whilst they were photographing our collection. And as you can see, it's quite a basic setup, but it just enabled us to get relatively professional photos. Obviously, for this process, COVID was not beneficial, and that at that point our photography had to go on hold, and we just focused on the online digitisation work. By the time we were able to return to site, we'd learnt that we'd been successful in achieving MEND funding from Arts Council England in order to repair and renovate the store. This is our large object store as it was previously. As you can see, we were filled to the brim and we weren't able to achieve a system of organisation. We found it very difficult to access objects. We couldn't see their numbers, etc., etc. So there were lots of issues going on here. But first and foremost, the funding obviously enabled us to re-roof the building and insulate the walls, which is obviously quite a task, but incredibly critical if delivering essential collections care. This is where the focus on large objects came in. So as we've said, our rationalisation has focused so far on large objects, and that is because we had to entirely empty the store, which you can see on the right. And we are currently in the process of refilling it. So when thinking about the collections audit, we knew we had to start with large objects. And for us, we kind of decided on things larger than a chair as our starting point, which is no mean feat. So it's taken us 18 months to move approximately 7,000 objects out of this building and into other locations around the site. But yeah, fortuitously now we are in the process of moving back in, which is really exciting. So, in terms of the audit, as the digitisation and photography work progressed, we discovered kind of just what a state we were in, really. We had objects in poor condition with little or no provenance, and one of our key challenges is duplicate collections, which obviously we've heard Fiona can relate to as well. So in 2023, we really realised that we needed to start delivering a collections audit. We needed to review what might not be sustainable to keep when balancing the kind of needs of our existing and future collection against the resources available to us. So obviously we used all of the industry guidance that Fiona's already mentioned, particularly the new off-the-shelf guidance from the Museums Association. And we have found that each time a piece of guidance gets released that it is kind of more and more helpful and practical. So that's really positive to see. We also obviously reviewed our in-house policies and procedures before carrying out this work. For us, knowing that we had a decant deadline really kind of put a kind of time critical nature on this project. And we sort of highlighted some key priority areas for review. So objects that are badly damaged or deteriorated, those with little or no provenance, duplicates, although as we'll see later, defining that in itself brings its own challenges, replica, prop or learning items which should not have been accessioned, items posing health and safety risk, objects requiring more care than the museum can realistically provide, and anything unlikely to have a future potential for display or research. So these are just some examples of some of the things that might fall into some of those categories. And as you can see, our collection is quite varied. So here we have everything through from a submarine engine to a fire escape ladder and a large lawnmower. So similarly to Fiona and their team, we created a decision tree to break down all of that guidance into something that was practical for us to use. So every time we assess an object, we assess it against this tree. And if an answer isn't clear, and many were not, we either erred on the side of caution or used it as an opportunity to question that object further, seek advice from other members of staff or institutions, individuals, and even the public where appropriate. So we have tried to communicate this process in various different ways, and that's something if anyone has any questions on, we're happy to talk about more later and what we've learned. But so far we've run 7 public audit consultation sessions with 49 people from our internal volunteer team, museum members, people from local community groups and other museum professionals. And we have enacted some of those recommendations from those people in our audit process. So in terms of the practical side of things, the way that we do it is we have separate audit documents for each category of collection. We started off with one big spreadsheet, and I would highly advise against that. It gets really unwieldy, can't cope with the photos, and it just becomes really hard to organise. So here you can see our mower and grass cutter spreadsheet and the different categories we have. And then if we get to the stage where an object is classified as kind of considered for disposal, we go on to confirm the situation with regards to ownership. And we actually discovered that many items were on loan and had never been reviewed. So we set about returning these, and then other objects get transferred onto our disposal recommendations list. So these are some of the, on the left you have one of the public sessions that we ran, and you can see one of the activities that we did with the group. And then on the right, we also have some of our volunteer university students who have also been instrumental in kind of completing the research process and helping us to make decisions. So it's never just one of us on our own. The museum's board of trustees, fortunately for us, and we recognise that this is not a position for everyone, but our board of trustees have been incredibly supportive. We went in at the start of the process and presented a paper to them, so they were on board from the start and understood what our intentions were, and that they could understand the potential impacts of the process. So for us, in practice, our working team includes Lisa, our collections manager, who has over 20 years' knowledge of this specific collection. Whereas myself, I previously worked for the National Trust. I've been here for almost 3 years, and that works really well because we have like a really balanced assessment of the collection between us, because one of us has been here for a longer period of time and less. So, we know the collection more and less well, and actually that forms a really good kind of healthy source of debate. We also gain the perspective of our collections care assistant, who obviously brings the conservation perspective. And as I said, we work with various collections trainees and volunteers who all bring different kind of life experience and perspectives to the process. We also have a collections audit subcommittee of the board, which comprises 3 trustees, 2 of which have collections experience and 1 who doesn't. And again, we really recommend that because it provides a really useful kind of devil's advocate counterpoint. Disposals lists are discussed in full with the subcommittee prior to going to the full board meeting for a final decision. And obviously, if authorised, we follow the accepted routes for disposal as outlined by the MA. So firstly, we offer to other museums and organisations within the public domain. And again, we can happily talk about this later, but obviously lots of us are in the same boat, so that hasn't always yielded positive results. Then we advertise obviously simultaneously through the Find an Object webpage as well as museum networks. Where condition or safety are the issue, as per the guidance, we have destroyed the objects, fully recording that in the objects record and ensuring that we have good photographs before we do so. So an example of this would be a root cutter, which had already collapsed as a result of active woodworm and needed to be removed from the store as soon as possible in order not to risk other objects. So far, we have sent 208 large objects through the process that have been approved for disposal, with at least 5 of those being direct outcomes from the audit consultation sessions. And of those, 10 have been transferred to other accredited museums. 1 very large multiple ton crane has moved to another museum, which is in the early stages of existing. 3 have been destroyed due to poor condition, and 9 long-term loans have been returned to lenders. That includes a horse-drawn hearse, which you can see on the screen, that had been long forgotten by its village and is now being celebrated by its local community through multiple events. Where none of those routes are successful, we do plan to go to auction as the most open and transparent route to rehome items, and any funds will be reinvested in the care of the collection.
Okay, sorry. We're recovering from colds, so we have a few coughs going on, so we'll try again. So what have we learned? So the work has without doubt been essential in helping us to get our back of house in order and to improve the quality of the documentation that we have for and about our collection. We couldn't have made it happen without the help of 678 remote volunteers from over 25 different countries and 102 on-site volunteers who undertook and continue to undertake photography, object movement and audit research. At least 48,000 records have been worked on eHive, of which 36,690 are now publicly accessible. 15,302 objects have been photographed, and 208 objects have been identified for rationalisation, with 23 moved on so far. And I'd just like to say, many of you will have heard me talk about this crane, and it was a very exciting day when the crane finally left the site. It took all day to load onto a low loader, but it did finally leave the site. For the first time, the museum has a really good understanding of the objects that make up its collection, and we can identify the items that we might be missing as we go forward. This enables us to make informed collecting decisions in a way that we've never been able to do before. While there's no such thing as a long-term loan, dealing with an object that was recorded as such many years ago can be a challenge as contact details go out of date quickly. So I really would advise you to keep on top of loan records.
So now we've all talked at you for a very long time, and we will have time for just general questions shortly. But we wanted to get you involved if you're willing to do so. And this is a version of one of the tasks that we run in the public consultation sessions. So in those sessions, we tend to run 3 different tasks that all focus on a different element of rationalisation and challenges that might arise. So as I said earlier, duplicates is a challenge that many museums face. And so we wanted to invite you to reflect perhaps on some of the examples in our collection that we have on the screen, or examples in your own museum. And if you're willing to, come off mute or post it in the chat and just open up to have a discussion about defining what a duplicate really is. Because you think you know what a duplicate is, and then you have to write it down, and actually that's quite a challenge. So we've just got some prompt questions. What do you think a duplicate is? Where do you think the boundaries for a duplicate should be? What factors would you prioritise about an object? How many of an object is enough or too many? And what is important to know about that object in order to decide if it is indeed a duplicate? So we have seed drills, lawnmowers and wagons as three of many examples in our collection. But I wonder if anyone would be willing to come off mute and just open up a bit of a discussion about this.
Hi, I'm Evelina. I work at North Links Museum, so we are much smaller, but still have quite a lot of this going on as well. And one of the things that definitely works for us, of course, because our collections policy is very much telling the story of North Lincolnshire. So if I would have any of these, and I would have, we do, we do have those. But if I look at the amount of lawnmowers that we have, and again, there wasn't ever a lawnmower manufacturer in our area, so there's nothing like that would prioritize it for me right away if it was made here. We have some stories of, my grandpa used this on his allotment, which then wins from all the ones that have nothing on it. So, but definitely our collections policy helps a lot with this case. For us, we can say none of these necessarily tell a story of North Lincolnshire, not of the manufacture or the use of it. It could tell the story that North Lincolnshire has grass, which it does, but I don't think we need more than one lawnmower to demonstrate that North Lincolnshire has grass. So yeah, so that you say Renton, but that's not North Lincolnshire. It's we're in that way we're lucky. We've got our own industry, but South Lincolnshire has got has got that industry. So that's where we are at the moment. I've got an offer of 2 wagons who are both made in North Lincolnshire in Belton, and for those 2 wagons I need to dispose of 2 wagons that are not made in North Lincolnshire and also don't have much of a connection to the North Lincolnshire area. So right away, the made in North Lincolnshire trumps that for me. So manufacture.
It's really helpful, thank you. That's really helpful, thank you. Bob, you've got your hand up.
I have indeed. It strikes me that, respectfully, that Lisa and her colleagues are asking slightly the wrong question. It's not just about, is it a duplicate? It's about, why have we got it in the first place? And what are we going to do with it? Which, of course, can change over the years. So just at random, looking at seed drills, I can conceptualize the idea where we have a seed drill which we are going to display in the sort of setting where a farmer would have kept a seed drill. We all know that if we do that, after a certain number of years, it will have rusted, rotted, or been eaten away. It will self-dispose. That's a fact. Therefore, it's not preservation. Why is it accessioned in the first place? Our colleague before, who's talking from Ulster, was talking in these sorts of terms on a large site with things being used for the purposes of set dressing. Now, if we've got an item because it is important and we really want to keep this item because it displays technological progress, interesting design, beauty, human stories, then we can't display it in a realistic setting we have to stuff it and exhibit it in a gallery looked after properly. And sometimes we can do that. Very often museums of our sort can't do that. So I think that if we want duplicates, we have to look at duplicates because, we know this item will only last 10 years. Then we're going to throw it away and replace it by another one. But haven't we then got to think in display terms? What happens after 50 years when we've run out? We've used up all the ones that we've got. But I also have to ask the question is, with these items that we ultimately cannot keep in proper environments for their long-term preservation, I really question the efficacy and the ethics of accessioning them in the first place, rather than putting them on a list that says, we have these items because they are necessary set dressing to help us tell our story. But these are not items that we are even going to attempt to claim to preserve forever. Apologies, colleagues, if that's a bit of a rant, but it's something I coped with throughout the best part of 45 years working in museums.
Hi, Bob. Sorry, go on ahead.
No, go for it, Fiona, please.
Bob, I agree and disagree with you at the same time. So I'm in a situation where we have some of our old homes dating from maybe 1860s onwards. One particular home has its original dresser, and it came, with the building when the building was acquired, I think in the mid 60s. We know who made that dresser. It came with the property. It is accession, but I want it out there. I want people to see it. I don't have display space. So you're torn of, even I took my children to the Ulster Folk Museum over the summer for the first time. What did they do? They immediately ran and sat in the chairs. They're like, no, get off the chairs, get off the chairs. Don't sit on the chairs, these old vernacular chairs. So we're torn in a way that we want to look after these. Obviously, people, generally speaking, just stuck out to my children, are very, very good. We want a realistic setting. I want the vernacular furniture out there, the creepy stools, the sukin chairs with the straw seats, the dressers that came with that building. I want that out there. Otherwise, people will just not see it in my store. I do store tours. Yes, I do those regularly, but I'm torn there because, yes, I want to keep that good and safe as well, but I really want people to see it and enjoy it. So I agree and disagree with you there on that as well. I really do. It is hard. I do have accession material out there in the open air, but if I didn't put it out there, there are some items I just simply would never put out, but I do have accession material out there, and it's needed, and it adds to the visitor experience and adds to the realistic environment that we are trying to portray of that period. So I don't know what the solution is there. I wish I could keep them all safe, but we do our best, and I do have to put it out there too,
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I would say that I agree also with some of what Bob says, but I also agree with some of what Fiona says. So some of our challenges, that many of the objects that we are looking at have been collected during a time when we didn't know what we'd got. So people, including myself, have collected thinking we didn't have something, and it's only now that we've had to empty everything in our collection store that we've found things and gone, oh, look, there's a third one of those. Do we really need three? Because we don't even have one on display. So I think some of this is dealing with that backlog and those challenges that we aren't aware of and that have crept up on us over time. I'd like to think that in time we'll get to a point where that won't happen anymore, because we've tried really hard to sort of sift out and make sure that we've got the right sort of objects in our collection. But obviously, we're humans. We're infallible. We don't always make the right decisions. And one of the things that we've put in place here at the Food Museum, for a long time, I was the only curatorial staff member here, and I have collected things that I shouldn't have collected, and I have got rid of some of those things again, because now that we have these conversations, it's really clear that they weren't right for the museum. Nowadays, I'm not allowed to make a decision like that on my own, and I appreciate that, and I'm really grateful for the support that I don't have to. But we look at things in a different way, we question them in a different way. And if something comes into the museum, whether it comes for the main accessioned collection or whether it comes for our handling, learning, activity collection, it is thought about very much more, and we are very aware of that. But we're also aware that sometimes, unless an object is demonstrated, it really just doesn't mean anything to our visitors. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your reflections. Does anyone have any further reflections on duplicates before we move on? Okay.
To do, particularly with the family Bibles, and yeah, I don't know if you're able to look at those as well.
Sure.
Okay, sorry, we're just catching up with the chat.
Yeah, I can see the family Bibles would be a key area of duplication. But as you say, each will have a very personal meaning attached to them. Most in poor condition. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Lisa, if you have any response to that. I think that's you touched on a really, really incredibly tricky one there. That, particularly early when we're talking about the public communication and the way that we talk about these things, getting rid of what are incredibly religious, sacred, personally important items is going to be one that's incredibly hard. I suppose the only advice that I can offer is, and I'm not sure at what stage you're at, but just to make sure that you have the backing of the team around you and your board, and that you've expressed your concerns about that particular area of your collection to them first, because the potential backlash that could come with that. Lisa, I'm not sure you've got any more practical tips.
No, possibly not. I mean, for us, we would consider whether something like that, where does its value, and I use that term really carefully, where does its value lie? Because if it's the fact that it's got the story of the family and it's probably more useful going forward for maybe family research, then I would question whether the museum is the right place to have it and whether it should be in a records office. For us, we wouldn't at the moment, although in time hopefully it will be different, we wouldn't have that information necessarily accessible to people. So I would suggest that maybe there is a question that says, are you the right place to hold that object, or would it be better in a different location? But I appreciate it's not an easy one.
No, and something to consider, which is not really a route that we've entered down, but is an option within the MA guidance, is, and I don't know how old these Bibles are, so this may not be appropriate, but one option is always exploring whether you can return to the original donor. However, you may feel that that's not appropriate and actually just would be more difficult, in fact. So there we go. Bob, you raised your hand again. Oh.
Can I just say, it was me that mentioned the libraries, the Bibles initially. I think, like Carrie said, the local archive office just wouldn't take them, because as a rural village museum, we would be seen as the most appropriate place to have them. We haven't run out of space yet, but we will.
Yeah, it's a really tricky position to be in. As all museums, we've always been very trusted places that will keep things safe, and it's really hard to kind of do anything that we feel might put that into question. So we sympathise with you, and we'll put our contact details at the end. We're very happy to have a further chat if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Bob.
Thank you. I was just going to come in on this point and draw a comparison between family Bibles, military colours, and First World War medal groups. These are all things that are extremely emotive to families, but let's be honest, are of limited use for museum interpretive or educational purpose. Many of them of no use, some of them are of a bit of use, a few are lots of use, But the question there has to be asked in stepping back 3 paces is, why should the museum be the place where these things are laid up and looked after in perpetuity for families? I don't think in my life I have ever collected a family Bible, because I've always said, no, if your family doesn't want to keep this, I haven't quite said shame on you, but it's really putting it back over onto the family to say, no, we have an example in the museum already. We can't use or store anymore. So I put that in as a thought, and actually there is to a certain extent a category of material which is of limited display or interpretive or demonstration use, where I don't think the museum is funded and resourced to act as a repository of the remains of society that society wants to be kept forever. If they pay us to do so, great, but they don't, so we can't do it.
You've raised your hand.
Hi. Oh,
Hi.
don't know
You're
why
here.
I'm not there, but never mind.
We can hear you. We
you
can
can
hear
see
you.
my beautiful museum.
Yeah.
The I think what Fiona said in her presentation about the fear really resonates with me in a big way. But my question is, so I'm only the 3rd curator in the 50-year history of Ceredigion Museum, and my predecessors had their own focus for collecting. And some of that, with the first curator in particular, he was very keen on horology. So he's amassed an amazing collection of horology, none of which fits our modern collecting practice, collecting policy. But do I consider that to be part of the history of the museum? Because there's something about the institution of the museum as well as the outward looking into the communities. The things that interest me are all the things about, that bring human stories into the museum. But that wasn't the focus of my 2 predecessors. Maybe some more so with the second, but certainly not with the first. So it still feels like a real dilemma in terms of thinking of rationalizing those things, because I will be I might be finding myself disposing of things that are part of the museum's history. Does that make any sense?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. I think my counter to you would be, ultimately, knowing what we know now and having the policies that we have in place now, does it meet your policies, and does it ultimately benefit the public? Do you believe that it benefits the public? And that also, I completely understand that it's very difficult to get rid of particularly an entire collection potentially that relates so strongly to the identity or previous identity of the museum. However, there are other ways to record that collection that would mean that you don't have to retain it physically, and kind of carry the weight that bears. Does that make sense? It is obviously a very emotive decision, but I just wonder, does it serve a wider public benefit for research, display, etc. now? And if not, perhaps it might be worth considering taking a detailed record of that collection and attempting to kind of move it on to someone somewhere, hopefully, that will benefit from it in a greater way.
Yeah, I think I'd be inclined to agree. We have several collections here that we know are either duplicates of objects held in other museums, or we've got them because they were really early items collected by the museum. But you know, the museum story moves on as much as the story of what we've got in this wider world around us. And I think that our challenge is how we continue to keep telling all these stories when we can just end up collecting and collecting and collecting and collecting. And we just don't have the space for everything. And we can't just stop telling stories because we've run out of space now. What happens to all the things that we don't yet have the chance to have collected and to have talked about. And I think this, for us, this is where doing our consultation has been really interesting. So there are objects that probably I would turn around and say, we can't get rid of those. They're really iconic. I get told off for using that word. Everybody remembers them. Everybody knows about them from the museum. But actually, when you dig into them, we don't really know anything about them. It's just that they've always been there and they would be noticeable if they weren't there. But actually, are they adding to the stories that we tell? And sometimes we've asked our visitors and they've gone, well, I don't know why you've got that. Get rid of that. I wouldn't want to see a load of those, or I'm not interested in that object at all. Now, again, we wouldn't just ask one visitor, we'd ask as many as we can, but ultimately they have a very different thought process on some of the things in our collection to what we do as the people that work with them and that deal with them every day. Fiona?
I agree and disagree. And I feel Carrie's pain because I have a lot of spades in our agricultural collection. I do not know an awful lot about spades, I admit. That's another thing I have to try and swat up on. But our former director in like the 70s, Dr. Alan Gailey, he was a spade man. And we've a spade mill on our site, which he was instrumental in getting created and set up here. And we have a lot of spades, and I wouldn't dream of getting rid of any of the spades. One, because the lack of expertise I feel I have on this, that I'd be too afraid, and two, it's a bit of our folk museum history. And some of those spades were made in our spade mill, which is not operational anymore. So it's like, oh, I couldn't dream of a couple of hundred spades, I think, and yeah, it's a tough decision, but I feel, yeah, it's part of the history of the folk museum as well. And we actually have a PhD student with us at the moment who is actually doing a PhD on the creation of the folk museum, because it has a long history. It was decades trying to get set up. It's very much aligned with recognizing a shared history here in a polarized society of the early 60s in Northern Ireland. So this was seen, there's a big deep sort of history to it being set up, and it's important. So I'm thinking of that as well. What about our institutional history? At one point, Dr. Alan Gailey organized a European-wide spade symposium that people from all over came, and it was really important. And yeah, I just feel, God, that's part of the history as well, and that's a tough one. So I feel your pain, Carrie. It's not always easy to make these decisions, but as Lisa highlighted, we don't make these decisions in isolation. I certainly hope you don't have to. I feel more relieved that we are part of a team internally to make this decision. It isn't just my decision. And yeah, I think Bob mentioned as well, whether it's in the chat or whether he said it verbally, about really arguing and justifying, if you're bringing in something new, that a future curator down the line doesn't have to deal with what I'm dealing with now. And I think we do have that now. We've better policies. As I said, there's a whole report has to be completed for every donation. Just to really, it must add to our policies, and we're really keeping a close eye on things now. And I think that is helpful, that I don't think somebody in the future may have this problem unless the collecting policies change very dramatically. But yeah, we don't know. We don't have crystal balls, so it's hard to tell.
No. We are coming to the end of our session, I believe. So I'm just going to zoom ahead, and we won't have time for that one. These are our contact details. We are very happy for you to contact us if you think we can be of any help. I'm not sure if Fiona is also willing to share her contact details. If there's any last burning questions from anyone, then please go ahead.
So stop sharing the screen. Yeah.
We've got a question in the chat to say whether you'd be happy to share your slides. If that's
Absolutely.
you're happy to, if you're happy to ping them over to me, I can share them. So we'll obviously make sure this recording is available as well. So you can go back through if there's anything that you wanted to explore in more detail, then we could do that. And the love for the decision flowchart coming through as well, I think.
Yeah, we've had quite a lot of love for our decision flowchart. What I would suggest is please don't assume that our chart will work for you. It's really important that you find the process that works for your organisation. We spent a lot of time with post-it notes and a big table and moving things around and working out if were we really asking the right questions, and was it really getting us to where we needed to get to? And there are many objects that end up in our amber, and amber is a nightmare. And amber is most definitely where you ask as many people as possible what they think. Because, like I said, they often don't tell you what you expect they're going to say. And I find that particularly fascinating. So if I can just draw us together for the end of the session, thank you to everybody that's taken part this afternoon. That's really wonderful. Please do get in touch with us if you have any questions or any thoughts after the session. If you are not already a member of the Rural Museums Network, please do join us, because we are a fabulous group, and we've been going quite a long time now, and there's an awful lot of knowledge that's out there. We share a lot of it through a discussion group online, but we also have our seminars and our Chewing the Cud sessions, more of which will be available on our website as we go into the new year. So if you've got ideas for sessions, or you'd love to come and join our committee, please, we'd love to hear from you. But yeah, basically, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a fabulous session. Thank you.